Pretty much all of the biggest companies and countries in the world have pledged to carbon neutrality. Essentially, there are two ways to achieve this. One is to reduce emissions as much as possible, and the other one is to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Experts agree that the way to go should be to first reduce emissions as much as possible, and then, and only then, compensate for the remaining emissions by buying carbon credits. And that brings us to the topic of today's conversation. The EU Commission is working on a framework to create a new kind of carbon credits called carbon removal certificates. And the goal of this framework is to make sure that those new certificates are much more trustworthy, that they're more transparent and permanent. To discuss this, I had the privilege of hosting Christian Holzleitner. He is the head of unit for carbon removals at the EU Commission, so the person at the very top leading the team working on this framework. This episode was made in partnership with Soil Capital. I am your host, Raphael, and this is the Deep Seed Podcast. Hi, Christian, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining me today.
Hi, Raphael. Thanks a lot for having me. Pleasure to be here.
You are the head of unit for the land economy and carbon removal at the European Commission. Could you maybe start by unpacking that title, explaining what you do, what your responsibilities are, and what are the key projects that you've been working on?
Yeah. So I work in the Director General for Climate Action. And my team deals with everything related to climate action in the land sector. So we talk agriculture, forestry, a lot about like also peatlands. What do we do with peatlands? So in general, land use, and then also about other ways how to remove carbon out of the atmosphere. So technological solutions like bioenergy with CCS. So a lot along the whole value chain of bioproducts. And how can we get that done in a way that it's good for the climate? So we have these big objectives for 2050 to be climate neutral. So for that, we need to reduce our emissions. And this is what is already happening. But we'll always have emissions, in particular from producing food and biomass. So that's unavoidable. So for that, we also must get better at really getting CO2 directly out of the atmosphere. So this is what you call removal. And then we need to store it in our soils, in our forests, in the products that we make out of it. So, for example, wooden buildings, bio-based buildings. And a certain share of that CO2 will also need to put back from where we've taken it initially. So like to the empty gas fields of the North Sea. So we are looking at the value chains that we will see like in 2040, 2050. So like really circular economy, bioeconomy, long-lasting products, more sustainable production of food. So into that economy that we will have in 2040, 2050. So, and that's very exciting because we really look forward to an economy that then on balance isn't any more bad for the climate, but we hope even good. And there, of course, agriculture, forestry play a big role. And this is why we have that interest now.
And great. You mentioned there's a few things I maybe want to come back onto. One thing you said is climate neutrality. And I keep hearing different terms, sometimes net zero, carbon neutrality, climate neutrality. What's the right terminology here? Why did you use this one?
So our objective for the European Union is climate neutrality. So we want to be on balance climate neutral in 2050. So this means the remaining emissions that we have in 2050, and some of them will be CO2, others will be methane, like for example for livestock. So we look at all greenhouse gas emissions, and then we need to see, okay, how many removals do we need to balance that? Or because what matters in the end for the climate is the concentration of the CO2 in the atmosphere.
Right, but when we say climate neutral, I also hear ecosystems, biodiversity, other things that are not greenhouse gas related directly. Is that also something that is included in the term climate neutrality?
No, climate neutrality is really a very clear metric on greenhouse gases.
Okay.
So CO2, methane, N2O, and the removals. But of course, a lot of the things that we are pushing for in the bioeconomy to make the bioeconomy more sustainable, to make farming more sustainable, are of course also good for biodiversity, for water, and so on. Because we need to look at the win-win solutions that pay off for everyone. I mean, to an extent, we've degraded our nature such that we need to do everything to get it back. And so if we talk about the rewetting of peatlands, that's equally good for biodiversity. If we talk about agroforestry, that's very good also for the resilience of our land. It's good for water and so on. So you need to look really on the overall, you need to have a holistic approach on sustainability. But of course, then the metric that we are looking at is the greenhouse gases.
Okay, I see.
So because this Paris Agreement and all of that is built on that, and because it's something that can be measured.
Right. So you said that the objective of the EU is to be climate neutral by 2050.
Yeah.
And then a part of that will be emission reduction, and the other one is emission removal, carbon removal, right?
Yes.
What is the proportion in the EU's plans today? What is the proportion of reduction versus removal?
Yeah. I mean, first we need to reduce our emissions, and that's our main task. And there we are on a good way with the rollout of the renewables, solar, wind, with energy efficiency measures. We are on a good way, and we have this intermediate target for 2050. For 2030, which means a 55% reduction.
55% reduction, but
compared to 1990.
1990.
And as I said, there renewables, energy efficiency will be the main driver to getting there. Also, like electric cars is another measure. But then, if we go from 2030 to 2050, we need to look really more at the circular and the bioeconomy, because we need to think more to substitute products, like in construction and chemicals. We use a lot of fossil carbon. So that we need to substitute with biogenic carbon or with carbon that we get directly out of the atmosphere.
Okay. Yes. So two different things you mentioned here. Circular economy. Maybe we could just define that very quickly. This is not going to be the central point of discussion today, but just to go over that. So the circular economy, the key idea is...
Yeah. So we need to get to value chains that are good for the climate. So think about a forest. The tree grows for 60, 70 years optimally. Then you harvest it. You take the CO2 and maybe the trunk of the tree. You build a house. There you can store the CO2 for another 50, 100 years. Then at a certain point you will demolish the house. You will incinerate it. But instead of letting the CO2 go back to the atmosphere, you capture it from the waste gases. And then you use the CO2, for example, to make bioplastic out of it. And you give it another 10, 20 years of lifetime. Then you incinerate again. At a certain point, you will want to put it back in the empty gas fields of the North Sea. And then you close the circle.
Okay, right.
So it's about really a different... not this... it's about a lot about resource efficiency.
Yeah, it's like we have a very linear system at the moment where we extract resources, we transform them, use them, and then throw them away, essentially. And now we're trying to create a loop where the energy, but also the materials and everything we use goes back as much as possible. So that's the key idea of
and of course, like waste management will become very important one, which is also important for agriculture. We need to use the waste much better to produce energy, or also to use it maybe, even as a feedstock for the chemical industry. So it's a lot about, how do we use the resources that we have much better because we won't have that fossil carbon anymore to use.
Yes, that's definitely something I want to come back onto, this idea of waste being used as energy. But just to stay on topic for now, then the second thing you mentioned is the bioeconomy, right?
Yes.
The bioeconomy. That's a new term for me, so I would love it for you to explain what that means.
So bioeconomy is agriculture, forestry, and everything we produce out of it.
Okay.
So the food industry, as I said, bioplastics, in the future chemicals, a lot, because they use still now fossil carbon. In the future, they should use much more biogenic carbon to produce chemicals. Then you have the whole forestry sector. What can you make with biomass? Now it's a lot used for energy, biofuels, and so on. But in the future, we could also see how we could, for example, use lignin, so from the wood fibers, to produce clothes. We have an interesting project in Finland now where they use the lignin as a storage in a battery. So you can do a lot of things.
Okay.
With what nature gives us, and the challenge is how do we do that sustainably? Because we need to better protect our forests, our soils, that they also stay fertile and productive for the future.
Okay. Yes. The central point of discussion I wanted to discuss today is the carbon removal certification framework, CRCF.
Yeah.
Could you maybe start by giving us a very top level overall explanation of what this framework is and why it's important?
Yeah. So what we in climate policy from the beginning, we've always started with monitoring, reporting, verification, MRV. So you need to know, like in this case now, how much carbon is stored for how long and how sustainably it's done. And once you have that, you can then build financial incentives on that. And we have a lot of experience with that, with the emission trading system that we have for energy, for industry, that we've now extended to transport and buildings. So what we want to do with that is we want to make ourselves ready in terms of the monitoring, reporting, for these new value chains that we will have in 2040, 2050, where it will be so important that we track the carbon so that it doesn't get lost and back in the atmosphere. And we cover the different activities that I've already been talking about. So we have 3 families of activities. The first one is carbon farming, so the production of the biogenic carbon, where we look at emission reductions. Because first you need to get the emissions down that we currently have from how we use soil, how we use fertilizer. In particular, I already said rewetting of peatlands. So drained peatlands is the biggest emission source that we currently have. So that we need to get down. We need to manage those drained peatlands differently. We need to do agriculture differently so that we can keep more soil more carbon in the soil. And then also our forestry needs to be done in a more sustainable way. That's also about having more carbon, but also making our forests more resilient. Because that's the big challenge with forestry, is that the trees that we plant today must withstand like quite a changing climate. That they should still be thriving 60, 70 years when the temperatures will be quite different from now. So this is all that we need to do in there. And this is where we want to give farmers, foresters, a better measurement so that they can show the benefits that they do for the climate.
Okay.
And carbon is, of course, like soil carbon, is equally a good measurement for biodiversity. So,
is it always, in the case of forestry, if you plant a monoculture of trees, that will bring a lower amount of biodiversity? Is the amount of carbon stored in those trees a good measurement of how biodiverse this forest is?
Yeah, let me be more precise. When I said I meant the carbon in the soil.
Okay.
Because more carbon in the soil is good. With forests, You need to maybe a bit more of a deeper consideration on this, because monocultures are, of course, also very prone to climate risk and to bark beetle and things like this. So while you may think, I just plant Christmas tree monocultures and there comes the carbon very fast, you do quite a risky business. Because if you have bark beetles or others, then the whole carbon is quicker gone than you may think. So you also need to think about building a resilient forest. So just to have a tunnel vision on, okay, I will now grow so much carbon is the wrong approach.
Mm-hmm. Yes, obviously, yeah. But it's probably a key issue to discuss here. Is it's maybe easy for someone to plant a forest and claim carbon certificates for the carbon in those trees. But what happens if 20 years from now that forest burns down or is damaged by
Exactly. And this is something, of course, we don't want. So this is also why, if we then go into more detail of our certification framework, well, we have this 4 what we call quality criteria, and one of them is sustainability. So like when we look into the certification of forestry and so on, I think we will be particularly interested in reforestation and really having also this view to the future and in having resilient forests.
Okay. So for me, this framework, the way I understood it, but I mean on a very top level, because to be honest, this is very new to me, but I think maybe that gives me an interesting perspective because many people listening will know roughly about the same amount as I do.
Yeah.
What I imagined is that there is a voluntary carbon market.
Yeah.
Right? So if I can try and explain what that is with my own words, and you can tell me where I'm wrong. So the voluntary carbon market, basically, a lot of companies have been pledging to reducing their carbon emissions. They've done that voluntarily, hence the word. It's not a requirement, a legal requirement. I mean, not yet. And there's kind of 2 ways to do that, as we mentioned before. One is reducing emissions. The other one is paying someone else who will remove carbon from the atmosphere on your behalf for money. And so that creates what we call the voluntary carbon market, where this carbon removed is sold and bought. While doing research on the topic, I found that there's been a lot of criticism of that market, especially in recent years. And I came across an article from The Guardian just from last year saying that 90% of the carbon offset projects from the Amazon rainforest were completely useless. And I kept coming across 4 different issues that keep coming back. And I thought it would be a good idea if we could discuss each of these issues. You could explain what they are and maybe how this new framework and the work that you're doing is proposing to address these issues. The first one is permanence. So that's kind of what we were discussing just now. It's how permanent is that carbon removal? Why is that a problem in the current carbon market?
Yes. So maybe as an introduction, we are really focusing on the monitoring, reporting, verification. And we see many different uses for our certificates, but we can come back to that later. So it's not only about the voluntary carbon market. And as you've said, the voluntary carbon market currently is not in such a good place. It's like almost like a market for second-hand cars, where everyone is claiming, I have a good car, but you're not really well placed to really know what you get. So there are a lot of trust issues. And a lot has to do that, as I said, you're not really sure what you are getting, because there are so many different types of credits out there, and everyone tries to do a little bit of different things. So a lot of these credits from the Amazon and other tropical forests were credits about avoiding deforestation. So they say, okay, look, I have this forest. Pay me something that I don't cut it down. So the counterfactual is already a bit shaky.
Yeah.
because it's just someone saying, okay, otherwise if you don't pay me, I cut it down. So this is already something we are doing differently. With us, it's only about increases in the biomass. So you have to show increased removals. So we wouldn't do that just for the maintenance of an existing carbon stock. And then comes in the question of the permanence. And this is just the question is, for how long is this carbon stored in a forest and or in a soil or in nature? And nature is living. So, and it's often, or in the most of the cases, if you stop the practice, like if you stop maintaining your forest well, you have quite a high risk that you get to natural disturbances, wildfires, and so on. And the carbon is back in the atmosphere. So, and that's a huge issue for a lot of these credits, because they say, yeah, pay me something. And for this, I say, I've removed 1 ton of carbon. And then the other guy uses it to offset a ton of emissions. But then maybe 30 years later, this forest isn't there anymore or whatever. Because often also this forest is not monitored for such a long time period. And with us, we are very clear with this. Our certificates are only valid as long as it's monitored that the carbon is still there. So, and this is what we hope, that this will really increase the transparency and the trust.
But in that case, what would happen if exactly the case that you just described? I paid a company to plant trees to remove a certain amount of carbon. And then we are 20 or 30 years later and that forest burns. What happens? That money is already long gone.
So for these natural disturbances, so this is the technical term for that. Normally, you either have to take an insurance or you have to set aside a certain buffer pool. So you have a forest of 100, you don't sell all 100, but only 80, and the 20 you keep when there's a wildfire or something. Mm-hmm. So you have a bit of a reserve, and then you can, so to say, deliver another credit if the one is burned.
Okay.
So the challenge with this buffer is a bit, if it's on the same plot of land, it's likely, okay, if one part of the forest burns, then also the other part burns. So, and this has been some issues like in California. So therefore, like to have a European-wide risk pool or an insurance would of course be much more effective, because you think then you can better pool.
Okay, how does that work then? Pulling together European foresters.
It would be like an insurance. So you would maybe get together, and a certain amount of these credits that you generate go into a risk pool. They are kept there by the insurance, and then it's paid out if you have an accident. It's like any other. Okay. Like any other insurance would work. And of course, like with any other insurance, the bigger the risk pool, the better the risk coverage.
Yeah. Okay. And what about the case of the forester decides to cut down his trees to sell them to make a profit?
Yeah. So then our certificate is gone. So then you cannot make any more claims on that. So we would, with us, there's an obligation to monitor. Mm-hmm. And so you would commit to keep the carbon in, like, let's say, for 30 years. And if you violate that condition during these 30 years, we cancel the value. And then the one who has made a claim with that has to buy another ton of CO2.
Right, okay. So that was for the issue of permanence.
Yeah.
The second one is...
But just to add on that, why we've also chosen those, what we call these temporal credits. Because what we would hope, of course, we start and someone commits for 30 years. But what we would hope is, of course, that the forester likes it so much that it's continued. The same way we think for agriculture, maybe we would start first with commitment period of 10 years. So to also reduce the risk for the farmer. Because if we tell the farmer, you have to commit for 200 years, no one will do it. So this is why we've also chosen those shorter time periods. But we would, of course, always hope that the farmer continues and does more over time. So that there's also an inbuilt incentive to continue the practice.
Yeah, okay.
Because just to have it for 10 years, of course, is for the climate not so exciting. You want to have it really for centuries then.
Obviously, yeah. But just going back on something you said earlier, actually, that I just remembered. So you said that a lot of these credits, they used to be given to protect forests from being cut down.
Yeah.
But that's not the case anymore. And I guess that kind of makes sense. But reducing emissions and protecting environment and ecosystems is also an important part of the plan, right? So, but what then stops someone now from cutting down a forest to replant a new one so that it can claim credits, but they've actually cut down a forest, which is not ideal?
Yeah, no, on that you would check.
Okay,
of course.
There's limitations to what can be done. And,
of course, these things would be checked. But I think where our credits, where I would hope that they could help, is like in reforestation, like or in Central Europe where we had the bark beetles, and I think there's now also more and more discussion that you may want to cut down the pine tree monocultures because they had such a big risk of wildfires and so on. And that would be a consideration then, to have a good replantation program so that we plant now those trees that can really withstand the effects of climate change for the next 60, 70 years. And this is not an easy task.
Oh, obviously, no. Okay, let's go back to our 4 issues then. And the next one is additionality. What does that mean?
You want that like an additional ton of carbon of CO2 is removed from the atmosphere, or that an additional emission is reduced. And like that's a bit the problem with the maintenance credits that we had before. There you just maintain the forest as it is, and you don't necessarily get additional removals.
Okay.
And this is what you want to ensure. So you want to give incentives that someone does more than he would have done otherwise.
Okay. Yeah.
So you want to incentivize a change to regenerative agriculture, agroecology, agroforestry, and so on.
Yeah. Okay.
And you want to see the documentation that there has really been a change. So, like when we again about reforestation, or like that you really use different tree species, or agroforestry, and you really change the way how you manage your land. Put in more hedges, trees, and so on.
Great. Yes. Another issue is leakage.
Yeah.
Could you explain what that is?
Yeah. So there's the idea, which is a discussion if you have land use change. So, for example, both in California and in New Zealand for their emission trading systems, they've given quite strong incentives for afforestation. Afforestation.
Which is?
So you take the agricultural land and you stop the agricultural production and put trees on it.
Okay, so as opposed to reforestation, which is regrowing a forest where there was a forest, here we grow a forest where there was agricultural land.
Yes, and this is land use change.
Yeah, okay.
And like in Europe, we also, in some European countries, you had a similar discussion with solar panels, or that like good agricultural land was then used to put solar panels there because it was financially more attractive. So, of course, then you have more carbon stored in that land, but the food production may then happen somewhere else. And so you may deforest somewhere else land.
Okay.
So, and it may then go from New Zealand to Indonesia, and then they cut down a rainforest. And this is what you want to avoid. So this is why afforestation, or everything related to land use, is a bit more of a difficult problem, because also over the over the last years, as you've seen with the crisis in Europe, with Ukraine and so on, food security is a big topic, and we want to avoid that, like fertile agricultural land is then used for forests. So we need to find the right balance. While of course afforestation on degraded land is the best thing you can do.
Could you give us an example?
Yeah, I mean, I've said that it's important that we keep our agricultural land, but some agricultural land we lose because we have less and less farmers, and so there is land that was maybe not so fertile, and that was then given up from agricultural production, and that's land where you can plant trees.
Okay, I see. But I mean, we're going to come to the discussion about agriculture and
Yes.
stuff. Maybe we're jumping the gun a little bit here, but I want to react on that. So where do we produce our food then? If part of the food, the land that we use today to produce food, instead of trying to regenerate the fertility of the soil and the health of that ecosystem so that it can produce more, we decide to rewild it, reforest it. Where do we move the food production to? Or do we have enough of that?
So this is like exactly this is the right balance you need to find, because you always want to use the land for the best possible uses. And of course, some of our land is better for grassland, better for forests. But as I said, what I find attractive is, for example, agroforestry, so that you can combine these aspects. And I think this mixed use of land can be something very attractive for farmers, because of course, if you grow more biomass, you have then also the income opportunities. As we've already said before, you could produce energy out of it. You could sell it as a feedstock to the chemical industry. You also have the opportunity with the carbon removal credits. So you balance a little bit your portfolio of the products that you have, and you do something good overall for the resilience of your land.
Okay, great. Yeah. So then I think I'm going to move on from the questions about the voluntary carbon market and move to the topic of agriculture, because we've already started there.
Yeah.
And that's, for me, obviously the key, the heart of this podcast is sustainable food production.
Yeah.
I've spoken to a number of people on this podcast before, farmers, experts, businessmen and women. And there seemed to be... the key central element has been that the current agriculture system is extremely damaging and extractive. But there is, thankfully, another model of agriculture that allows for food production, but at the same time being able to store carbon, to improve biodiversity, water cycles, and has all of these amazing co-benefits. And so the conclusion is often that we really need to transition as much of that farming system from an extractive one to a regenerative one. It seems like a no-brainer. It's better for the environment, it's better for the farmers, it's better for the consumers, and so on. So the big question that often arises from that is, first of all, why is it so slow, that transition? Why is there so few farmers really transitioning to the system if they're so much better? What is kind of holding that transition back, and how can we speed it up? Do you have answers to those questions?
Yeah. I mean, first, with what we are proposing here, we want to help that transition. So because we want to unlock additional income through carbon markets. What I understand, of course, and this is the case in a lot of almost everywhere when we deal with climate action, every industry or sector. It needs initial investment costs. So you need to change. And it's about how do you finance those startup costs. And of course, it's often then connected to risks. Like in this case, you may lose your fertility for certain years, you may have that slump. And then, okay, maybe it's good in the long term. Like every renewable energy, solar, wind, in the long term, that's the cheapest energy source we have. And what we're building now is the best energy system for the next generations. But now we have to invest into all these additional fixed costs. We need to build the networks and so on. You need to renovate your house to make it more energy efficient. In the same time, you're still living in it. So you also have to pay the gas bill in the same time. And I think for farmers, it's a bit the same. You have a business model that you are used to, that you know, with which you can hopefully provide a decent income for your family. And then you do this, you're doing a big practice change, a shift, and there are risks. And it seems that the current financial incentives are not sufficient, that more farmers do that shift. Mm-hmm. And what we are hoping to provide here is really financing that is based on results, has a credibility for that. And I think farmers very well understand pricing. And so we would put that in. And I think what we value with this carbon removals and so on is like really the increase in the value of the land, because your asset, your soil, becomes more valuable. And but you have to do what I understand, you have to do a transition in that, and there are those risks that want to be covered.
I see. Yeah. So that's sort of what. So Soil Capital is the partner of this podcast, and that's sort of what they're doing by rewarding farmers for soil health and using carbon as a proxy.
Yes.
That it's maybe not the perfect proxy, but as the best one that exists today to bring farmers an extra income for the efforts that they're doing in transitioning and to improving the health of soils. Is that sort of the same idea? But how does it changes the situation?
And I think in additional, carbon is something that is understood, like also by investors, because we've already created these other emission trading systems. So there's the voluntary carbon market. There are compliance markets on that. So this currency of CO2 is currently better understood than any other metric on biodiversity. So this is, I think, it's also why it's attractive to use emission and removals as a reward system. And I think in a lot of cases they are a good proxy, also for biodiversity, water, and so on. But like in our certification scheme, we will be more explicit about this sustainability benefits. So I think it's both. It can be measured, and there is an understanding out there in the world how you can finance and value the CO2.
Understood. But since companies like them have been doing that already, how is this new framework changing the situation?
Like what we are always good in Brussels is at scaling up and harmonizing and opening a European market. So there are several initiatives like you've mentioned, Soil Capital. We have a public initiative in France, La Belle Vagabonde. We have in Spain an own initiative for forestry. Italy is thinking about a similar scheme and so on. So what we can provide with that framework is really opening up a European market for that, and defining one single standard. And by this, we want to increase the trust, transparency of that market and give it a push that we can scale it up quickly.
Okay. So these initiatives are small local initiatives at the moment that are growing, but then you're trying to create this framework so that it can scale, and so that more farmers could benefit from them. The price of carbon would change as well. I mean, the reward that farmers would get for their efforts would be improved.
I mean, this of course depends on the on how the carbon market develops and how we will do that. But maybe let me say that what we also want is, of course, that this certification, this monitoring, reporting, could also be used for the common agricultural policy, and then it's also reflected in the member state targets that they have. So our vision is there very much that we have that we maybe get to a single information system that can be used for several purposes. So it could then be used also for public financing, for private financing, for the reporting of Scope 3 emissions in the food value chain. So for us, it's very much about first creating credible information system. And of course, if we can link to the existing land parcel information system under the Common Agricultural Policy and so on, or this becomes much more powerful, because what I hear, and I fully understand it, that farmers are quite annoyed by the number of forms they have to fill in and so on. So the more we can use all the advantages that like digital, remote sensing, everything has, and we have one information system, I think that will be quite powerful.
Okay, so that's a system that would, in theory, allow farmers to reduce the amount of administration work that they have to do. Because everything is simplified and centralized on the
I would very
level.
much hope so, and also that you would have like one coordinator or service agent, advisory services that helps the farmers to do that transition. So because what we see is that not a single farmer will participate in the carbon market, but that you have someone like Soil Capital or Label par Carbone, or like a cooperative in between that get together 10, 20 farmers in a region or then across Europe. Again, this element of risk pooling, which is important. And then, of course, they learn from each other. So this is what we understand a lot if we also look at other local regional initiatives. The important thing is you have 1-2 farmers that started the transition, and then the other farmers see, okay, that can work. The guy has done it for 5-10 years, so I will follow. And that will happen on regional level. It's not Brussels telling a farmer what to do. We are terribly bad at telling people what to do. But what we can do is to provide single definitions, harmonized rules, and hopefully then when we look further, also a good financing. But really, the transition, the work, that must be done on the ground, because I mean the farmer knows their land best. But of course, they also need all the advisory services and so on. And this is what we hope to facilitate with that framework.
Okay. You mentioned it. I read something about mandatory biodiversity co-benefits inside of the framework. Could you explain how that works?
As I've always said, okay, we have these 4 quality criteria. We've already touched upon the permanence. Then we also have the quantification. Yes, and we also talked about additionality. And the 4th one is sustainability. So we also want to show that the activities that happen are also good for biodiversity, water, adaptation, and so on. And we think that like a lot of these things that you do for climate, for storing more carbon, are also good for biodiversity. We've already had different tree species, agroforestry, all of that, cover crops, no tillage. Well, these are all measures that are also good for biodiversity and the soil quality. And those are the practices that we want to privilege, that we want to promote in the first place. Because by that, I think there's also a higher willingness to pay than for those credits. So because if you can make a case, I'm not doing this Christmas tree plantation, but I'm really doing a good mix of activities, agroforestry, extensive livestock, whatever, what you think how this idyllic farm should look like. I think that should get the highest.
Obviously, yeah. So you need to prove one way or another that this carbon removal is also associated with an increase in biodiversity.
Yes,
somewhere.
Yes. And
so does that disqualify a lot of the technological-based solutions like direct air carbon capture and stuff like that? We haven't really discussed that. We've talked about nature-based solutions, but I wanted to just as a side note, because I don't want it to be the focus of the conversation, but we haven't really discussed the technology-based.
So Yes, different types of removals come with different advantages. And of course, the advantage of nature-based are the biodiversity benefits. And in general, the benefits for the soil quality and the fertility. As we've also already talked a bit, it's a bit more challenging with the permanence, because it's the carbon will only stay in as long as you continue the practice. While if you look at direct air capture and you store it geologically somewhere in the North Sea, there the big advantage is it will stay there for centuries. So, and this is why this is called then a permanent removal.
Okay.
So, and this is also why those two different types of removals will be valued differently.
Okay. But in the case of this direct air capture, how do you improve biodiversity? How can you prove that you're improving the biodiversity? Is not really...
No, it's not. I mean, direct air capture is not related so much to biodiversity. One of the key sustainability issues with direct air capture is the amount of energy you need.
Yeah.
So you want to do direct air capture with renewable energy. If you do it with gas, this is not such a good. Not such a good thing.
But if we have a limited amount of renewable energy available in circulation right now in the system, if you use it for that, it means you don't use it for something else. So even if you use the renewable energy, that's still kind of, there's a problem behind that, no?
Yeah, but one would think that we have like really big scale up in direct air capture in the 2040s, 2050s. So by then we should have a sufficient renewable energy. And the direct air capture currently is something very expensive. So you talk about costs per ton of carbon, maybe 500, 1,000 euros.
Yeah.
While if we look at agroforestry and so on, maybe we talk about 100 to 200 euros.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Because I tend to be skeptical about this technology-based solutions. I mean, I don't know much about them, so it's more based on my kind of perception of things. But I feel like the key issue that created all of these problems that we're in right now regarding the climate and the environment it's a mindset problem. It's a mindset of humans thinking that they're separate from nature and that they can just use nature as a resource, instead of understanding that we are part of a really complex ecosystems. We're part of nature. And I sometimes feel like these technology-based solutions are the old way of thinking, the old mindset of thinking that we are separate from nature, while the nature-based ones are a bit more based in the idea that, okay, let's see how we can help nature thrive so that it can help us have better lives.
Yeah, but we may have gone already that far that we need also the technological solutions. I mean, as I said in the beginning, it all depends on the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And it's, of course, there are many things play in there. And maybe the world in 2040, 2050 with artificial intelligence will be very, very different. And we will all have our digital advisors that will tell us which diet we should do, which mobility we should take, and so on. And we can also change our demand behavior a lot. But for example, of course, the diet, what we eat, has such a big impact on the land use. I mean, we use most of our land in Europe currently for feed, not for food. So how much we'll eat in the future, how much meat and dairy products will have a very big impact on how much land do we have available. So to do more nature-based solutions, so for example, to do more afforestation, how much will we travel? How much will we continue to fly as much as we do now? And if we continue with that, we'll definitely need direct air capture, because otherwise we'll not manage.
Right, but by accepting that statement that we will need direct air capture, aren't we just then slowing down efforts to reduce emissions, because we're saying, well, we're going to find a solution somewhere down the road, so let's not make too much effort here?
No, but this is not we need both. As I said, we've gone the path to.
But I understand that, and that's what the IPCC reports say.
Yes.
They say we've gone too far, and we need carbon removal.
Yes.
But do they mention specifically technology-based carbon removal? I just think it's the general carbon
But
removal
as I said, this depends a lot on our future consumption.
Yeah. Okay.
Patterns and mixes, and what do we want?
Okay. Sure.
And it's a lot about our lifestyles then.
Of course, yeah.
Then in
But
2040, 2050.
It's a criticism that I read and I thought had value, and I think is within the scientific community is still being debated, is that if we open the door to saying, well, we're going to need this technology-based solutions with carbon capture from the air, then we are focusing a lot of our energy and money and development on that rather than on reduction and on nature-based solutions.
No, but I think reductions are definitely cheaper than direct air capture. So the rollout of wind, solar, no question there. So this is something we need to do first. But we need to look into all solutions.
Of course.
This seems unavoidable. But of course, it's then of course a question of policy. It's a societal choice, and we have to see where we will be in 2040, 2050.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. But that's a long way away. 2050 seems like, well, it comes fast, I know, but there's an urgency. The urgency is pretty big,
yes,
and to make big, meaningful changes right now as soon as possible.
Yes.
And so, just sorry again, because I'm just putting my personal feelings here on the table,
yes.
and usually I don't do that much on the podcast. I'm just here to ask you questions, but I feel like we have these amazing technologies, which is trees and plants, and we have incredible technologies already to help with these issues. And I'm sometimes confused as to why we're not investing more in these existing tried and tested nature-based solutions, and so many people are dreaming of these technological solutions.
Yeah. No, but I think this is also why we do this framework, is to add the credibility to those nature-based solutions. Because now that we are like discussing this one against the other, of course, you could see that they are in competition. And what we want to provide is a level playing field. And we want to make nature-based solutions credible. And that we can say how much carbon is stored for how long and how sustainably. So that, as you say, that the investment can go there. Yeah. So that investors, like insurances, other big corporates, but also the public, I mean, this common agricultural policy is still the largest part of the EU budget, need to be reassured that when they invest more into these nature-based solutions, what do I get out of that? Yeah. And like it's so often, but what doesn't get measured will not be done.
Of course, yeah. I understand that, yes. Another key point is transparency. And I read something about an EU registry. Yes. Could you explain what?
Yeah. That's one of the big challenges also in the voluntary carbon market or in voluntary certification schemes is how transparent are they about how were those removals measured? Are they only counted once? Could they be sold several times? And so on. And so we've chosen to rely on a system that's tested. We have, under the Renewables Directive, a certification scheme for sustainable biofuels. And we use exactly the same setup with certification schemes, certification bodies. Are just getting quite technical, but we'll have third-party verification, so from an independent body verifier, and we'll store all of that information in a publicly accessible registry. So in this registry, you'll have the farmer or the group of farmers that participate. You will there have a certificate of compliance where you will have how much carbon you removed in total, how many emissions have you reduced, compared against which benchmark. You'll have all the sustainability criteria, so that can be quite comprehensive. And then in addition, we create then this credit. So this 1 ton of CO2 that can then be traded. And we will also store there like all the certification audits, all the reports. So this will be completely transparent on what is happening in the farm or with the direct air capture installation, so that you can be really assured on what you are buying. You are assured that as long as the claim is valid, this is monitored. You see who's buying this unit, where it's ending up, whether it's used like within the value chain, or because you may want to sell it then also to the ones to whom you sell the food, so that then these food processors can tell the consumers or their investors, look, my value chain is climate neutral or maybe even climate positive. You may want to sell it maybe in a public auction, some for public financing, or you sell it on the voluntary carbon market, maybe to an airline or whatever you want to do. And that all of that would be completely public. So we would create a marketplace for that. And as I said before, what I would hope is that over time this can really become a complete and single information system about our natural assets in Europe. So we could store all that information there. Of course, what is important is that we follow all data protection rules. So there's nothing to be revealed on sensitive business information.
Okay, but that level of transparency then would completely prevent greenwashing, because anyone would have access to the actual facts on the ground of any claim that is being made by a company or an individual. Yes. Does it mean that anyone claiming to reduce their emissions within the EU by buying certificates will have to comply with this framework, or can you still purchase on the voluntary carbon market as people do today and make claims? Is it two separate things, or does it completely replace the current
these are
market?
For the moment two separate things. So what we start off small, voluntary, because we want to test our methodologies and build up the registry system and the certification system. Then comes the question is, okay, how will the future market look like? Will it be just a voluntary market? So do we create maybe like a voluntary market for Europe? Would we think about integrating into an emission trading system, or maybe an emission trading system for the agri-food value chain? What would be the link to the common agricultural policy, to public financing, to other financial instruments, to impact finance? So there are a lot of ideas.
So it's kind of a pilot project to try and put systems together, see how they work, and see how you can then use the system on other aspects of on the European level.
And how can we then really scale up the financing?
Okay, right. Okay. Where are you in this process at the moment?
So we've in March we've got the agreement with the member states and the European Parliament on this overall certification framework. And now we're working together with an expert group to look at the different certification methodologies, as well as on the setup of the registry. Mm-hmm. So we are looking into specific certification methodologies on the technological side. We mentioned direct air capture, bioenergy with CCS. We'll probably also be looking quite soon on biochar. And then in carbon farming, we'll look at the rewetting of peatlands. We'll look at agriculture, including agroforestry, so soil carbon and biomass. And then, like over the years, we will, over the next years until 2026, we'll also look at the reduction of fertilizer emissions. And until 2026, Parliament wanted us to develop also a pilot methodology for livestock. So by 2026, we should be ready to have really like a whole farm approach and cover everything that happens on a farm.
So when you say you look at these things, so you mentioned many things like peatlands, biochar, agroforestry. Like you say, we're going to look at it. What does it mean?
So we need to develop that methodology. So we look at the existing methodologies, like for soil carbon, that's the methodology by Vera, what is under the label Bas Carbone. Mm-hmm. For rewetting of peatlands, we have more futures in Germany. We have a methodology from the UK Peatland Code. And we kind of want to construct the state of the art, what is like the best combination of different monitoring methodologies. We've discussed how would we design like the buffer, insurance rules, and so on.
Okay, in the methodology, we talk about the methodology to measure
Yes, to measure
greenhouse gas emissions and
Exactly.
removal, right? We're focusing on this.
We focus on that.
Yeah.
So, and if everything really goes well, we could be ready by 26, 27 to start the certification.
Okay, right. What kind of hurdles does it need to go through before it can get approved? Like legally, I guess on the EU level, you have a process. You're preparing this at the European Commission level. It needs to go through the Parliament.
There's a specific legal procedure for that.
Okay.
So we're involving this expert group where we have the member states, stakeholders, a lot of independent experts who advise us in the drafting of the methodologies. Maybe what I should also say, we have a great project under the Mission for Healthy Soils. I don't know whether you're familiar with that. So this is one of our research projects, and we have one dedicated just on soils, which is called Mission for Healthy Soils. And we have one project which is called Credible, and they are really focusing at bringing all stakeholders on carbon farming together. So they had their first carbon farming summit in March in Valencia in Spain, and they had a huge turnout of startups, scientists, and so on. So they had, 300 people in Valencia and another 300 online. So it was a very positive atmosphere. And of course, we want to draw on that knowledge. So, and they are helping us to develop that methodology. So we try to be quite inclusive and get all the best experiences from Europe. Then we need to write that up. Then it becomes a legal text. I know that will be maybe 20, 40 pages. And then we need to get the agreement from Parliament and the member states. And if they are also happy, then we can get going.
Is that going to be difficult? Like, is there sometimes opposition on that side of things where you fear that certain aspect of the framework will be criticized or
but that's good. It's good. Of course, I mean, you need to have different views. I mean, you've already touched before upon that. There's a certain tension between nature-based and technological solutions. We have both in the same expert group, so we have similar debates. Okay, what is now the difference between the two? How can we really distinguish the two? What are the advantages, disadvantages from both? Of course, there's a high scrutiny by civil society based on the experiences in the voluntary carbon market. So I think everyone wants that we do a better job. Then, of course, from the farming community, there are concerns about the administrative complexity, the credibility, the costs. I mean, like soil sampling is still something expensive. So we also need to see how can we combine like remote sensing, modeling, on-site monitoring to find like a credible solution, but that's also cost effective. Because I mean, what we want at the end is of course that we have a high uptake of our certification.
Okay.
And for that, I think we need to check all those boxes. It must be credible. It must show also the biodiversity, the soil quality benefits, but it also needs to be easy to implement.
So these the stakeholders and expert groups that you've mentioned, does it include farmers themselves and foresters?
Of course, we have Copa Cocheca, we have the young farmers, we have several of the carbon farming organizations, but a bit of a challenge there is still that, of course, a lot of these guys who are active in regenerative agriculture, we have organic farming and so on, that they are often like smaller groups and they are not yet like really integrated at the European level. So that would be something I would appreciate very much, to have like really a stronger voice also from all from all the different types of agriculture.
Do you face a lot of lobbyists from different interest groups in your day-to-day work?
Yeah.
How does it work?
That's good. That's good because you need to have the different perspectives, and be it from industry, be it from the civil society, from the NGO, as I said, or also from community of younger farmers, of agroecology, agroforestry, regenerative, organic, and so on. And you also have the classic. You have the fertilizer industry, pesticides, and all of that. You really need to hear all the different views.
And those kind of industries, or the agro industry, especially like you mentioned, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and stuff. Are they against this framework, or aspects of the framework that are important to you, or are they playing along with this idea? I mean, do they?
No, but I think that everyone is. I think everyone is seeing in which a dire state the soils are, and that I think that we need to do something to take better care of these assets that we have, of the soils, of the forests. I think everyone recognizes the impacts that climate change has, and it won't get easier. So I think also, I think all big food processors are very concerned about their supply chains, and of course with all these extreme weather events, droughts, and so on, the resilience of the supply chains is on everyone's mind.
Yeah, obviously. But I'm wondering, again, from my naive perspective, if businesses, certain companies or lobbies representing these companies, whose business model is really based around chemical agriculture, for example, if we promote the transition to regenerative farming, to agroecology, to models of agriculture where we use nature-based solutions rather than chemical-based solutions, if that's in their own financial interest, and if they are capable of changing to this new kind of economy and model, or if they're more like fighting it, which is the perception that most people have, me included, is that these industries and these lobbyists will fight it because it's against their current financial interests.
As I said, this is, and I think that's a big challenge. How do you change your business model while you need the current business to generate the revenues that you can do that? So this is not easy, and
obviously,
and I think like a lot of farmers are in debt, and they have to see how they make to meet the answer, and so there are big financial risks involved, and there's a lot in stake. But I think also that like a lot look at okay, how could I change my business also to become more a service provider to farmers? How can I change that? Because if I just sell a certain product without any service, I can be more easily substituted by an import.
And this framework and the different pieces of legislations around this framework that you're working on, do you think it's going to incentivize these companies to change their business models, because they're now seeing that this is going to happen, this is going to change, and they have to adapt, or they will be in trouble?
What I would hope is what we do with the certification, that this can be really used as a key performance indicator for a lot of different in a lot of different ways. So also, okay, how can you use your fertilizers more efficient? I think no one wants to waste fertilizers, but often the data is missing, or there are no viable alternatives. And I think this is also something that we want to incentivize, or this better service for farmers, and to create, as I said, what I would hope is, or that we can create a lot of regional, local initiatives, because I think this peer-to-peer or learning from your neighbor is the most credible way on how to how to do it. But as I said, I fully recognize that this involves risks, and there needs to be the right financial incentives that we can manage that transition.
That's the key, right? Because for farmers at the moment are the ones taking most of the risks in those transitions. So, and we need to find ways to protect them, or better incentivize them, or better reward them for the risk that they're taking. So, is that the path that we're taking? Do you see farmers being better supported in that transition?
So, I think this is what we would hope that we can do with that framework, is to unlock the voluntary carbon markets for the moment. Maybe have a better base also for financing of farmers, because then also the banks see, okay, this guy is doing something for maintaining their soils and so on. So I'm more ready to give a credit to a loan to him, and then to look into how our member states, how under the common agricultural policy, we can move to a more result-based financing, or whether we could think about a bigger, more regulated trading scheme for the agri-food supply chain.
Could you maybe tell us what your vision is for the future of agriculture? Let's focus on agriculture. Like, what do you see agriculture being like in 2040, in 2050?
I'm incredibly positive on this because I think the bioeconomy is a growth sector for the future. So if we manage on our vision of climate neutrality, the bioeconomy will be key, and there's still food. Then, as I said, we need more biogenic carbon for the industry, for chemicals, construction materials. We also still need a certain amount of energy. So what do we do with waste? So how can we also there make that more efficient if you think about biogas and so on? So I see very much that farmers could have a much more also diversified portfolio of products, have a stronger economic base on that, and of course we should do that in a way that of course all our natural assets are in a much better shape than they are now. And I think we have all these challenges of this generational renewal in agriculture, and we need to make that a better place to work, because I think it's working in nature, with nature, is one of the best things you can do. But we need to create the right conditions with that. And I don't think that we are going into, or for the decades to come, is that the demand on nature will decrease, on agriculture, on forestry.
You don't think it will decrease, you said?
No.
Okay, yeah.
Because we will have food, and then comes a lot of other things on top. And of course, we need to mobilize the willingness to pay for that. And of course, and that's a task for the whole agri-food value chain, or in general for the bioeconomy. And we need to involve everyone to unlock that innovation potential that we have in there, from the technological solution. I talked a lot about remote sensing, precision farming, and so on. Maybe different types, of course, of agricultural machinery that will fit.
Okay, so
but then all these different practices that you can do, where you can, I think, in a much better way combine livestock, arable farming, forestry, and so on. So I think that there's huge potential there.
Sure, like diversity seems to be an answer to most of the questions that I ask people on this podcast. You know, like diversity of production, diversity of income, biodiversity. All of diversity seems to be a key element. And I was mentioning earlier how sometimes the the mindset was wrong in thinking that we were separate from nature, and we started thinking in monocultures and single elements, and now we're maybe moving back to a system where we embrace the diversity and the complexity, because the more of it we have, the stronger and the more resilient we become.
Yes. No, I think this is a big topic, and I think also this, like what I like a lot is to really think in it as an asset, and we need to increase the value of. We need to take better care of that, and then we have a bigger asset. And just like from a carbon or climate perspective, if we don't use fossil carbon anymore, we only have two other alternatives, and this is biogenic carbon. This is carbon directly from the air. So carbon itself should become a very valuable commodity in 2040, 2050. And who can produce that carbon will be a lot the farmers and foresters.
So would you, I would say recommend for farmers or for people who would like to get into farming that the best way to go today is to transition to more diverse systems, and you believe that they will be supported in that endeavor?
So as I said, I think what we are always bad in Brussels is in giving advice and telling other people what to do. I think two things that we can do is, as I said, on the monitoring, and we can provide the financing.
Okay, yeah.
But then I would say then let the market work. But of course, we need to take into account all costs, and this is what we haven't done, because the emissions and the damage to the climate or to the nature is not in the financials currently. But once we've brought that in, then I think it's really that everyone should really then do that what they think is best for their land. And I think as a farmer, it's you who knows.
Great.
Who knows that.
Yes. One last question to wrap up the conversation.
Yeah.
What gives you the most hope about the future?
The people. The people I'm dealing with. I find it like, as I said, in this conference in Valencia on this carbon farming summit, to see like the enthusiasm of both the scientists, the startups, everyone involved there to change things, to do things better. But also now we are also at the Commission. We have now this stakeholder dialogue on agriculture that President von der Leyen has launched. There are a lot of good ideas there, and as I said, I think there is this underlying understanding. We need to take care of our natural assets.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Well, thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. It was my pleasure.